We're going to conclude our pre-flop section talking about 3-bet bluff mathematics. So when somebody open raises, we can either fold, call, or we can 3-bet. And when we're 3-betting, we're either 3-betting for value or 3-betting as a bluff. Now, when we're 3-betting for value, we don't need to worry about the math, but when we're 3-betting as a bluff, we need to know how often it needs to work to be profitable. And so that's what I want to talk about in this video. I want to introduce you to that math. And in fact, you're actually already familiar with it because when we were talking about our steel break-even points, well, the math is exactly the same for a 3-bet bluff. So the break-even point for a 3-bet bluff is going to be risk divided by risk plus reward. So again, the very same equation. So our risk is going to be our 3-bet bluff amount, and the reward, of course, is going to be the amount of money in the pot before the bluff. So when we are 3-betting, there are standard sizes that we use, and I wanted to make sure that I use those sizes. Also, in this assumption, I'm assuming that somebody has open raised, and there's still the 1.5 big blinds in the pot from the small blind in the big blind, because we're assuming in this situation that somebody open raised from under the gun, middle position, cutoff, or the button, and somebody else is 3-betting. So if under the gun, open raises, then middle position, cutoff, button, small blind, or big blind can 3-bet. So we're making sure that we include the blinds in addition to the open raise. And for our standard sizing, there's 3 different standard sizings when it comes to 3-bets. When you're in position, we typically make it a little smaller than 3x the initial raise. When we're out of position, we typically make it a bit bigger, such as 3.5x. And then just a general standard sizing that you could use rather than using these modifiers based upon whether you're out of position or in position, is you could simply just make it a 3x raise as well. Either of these are fine. I wanted to include all 3 because I wanted to show you the slight differences between a smaller sizing and a larger sizing. So the math is here, and we don't actually need to go through all the numbers because I went ahead and figured them out. We just assumed that somebody open raised to 3 big blinds, and we 2.8x'd it, or 3x'd it, or 3.5x'd it to create our 3-bet sizing. And so that's our risk, and then the risk plus what's already in the pot, the reward. And the reward is always going to be the initial portion before our 3-bet. So that's going to be right here, the 3.5 big blinds plus 1.5 big blinds. So what this shows us is that our break-even point is going to be anywhere from 65.1 up to 70%. Based on our sizing. So our 3.5x needs to work 70% of the time to be break even, meaning it's 0 EV, meaning it's not profitable or unprofitable, it's a break even point. And the smallest sizing needs to work just over 65% of the time. So knowing this, we can make some assumptions on our opponents, and we can determine when we should and when we shouldn't 3-bet. Now, I want to talk about when we can 3-bet bluff. So there's a couple of primary reasons why we would 3-bet bluff. And I want you to understand that 3-bet bluffing is a risky endeavor because we're taking a weak hand and we're bluffing it and building up and bloating a pot where our opponent may call, they may 4-bet us, and we may have to play post-flop play. Now, there are 2 primary reasons. As you move up in stakes and you play good opponents, you want to start balancing your range, because if you only 3-bet with value hands, your opponents are going to realize that. They're going to start adjusting, and whenever you 3-bet, they're simply just going to fold or 4-bet you when they're ahead. But once we start balancing our range with value 3-bets and bluffs, then we keep our opponents off keel. They don't know if we're 3-betting for value or 3-betting as a bluff. And that allows us to get paid when we get good hands, because sometimes they're going to call us when we're bluffing and we'll lose. And sometimes they're going to call us when we have our value hands and we're going to win. And the whole purpose of this is to ensure that we win more than we lose, to make it more profitable to 3-bet. And once you start playing a balanced style of play, and of course a lot of people say GTO, game theory optimal, you understand the importance of this. If you're playing in the micro stakes online or the live low stakes like 1-2 or 1-3 live, you really don't need to worry about balancing your range, because when we're balancing our range, we're assuming we're playing against very good opponents that are also balancing their range and they're playing unexploitable poker. But as a lot of us know, at the low stakes and live games and the micro stakes online, people aren't at that level of skill yet. The second reason is to exploit our opponent's tendencies, specifically to exploit a high fold equity, meaning that if somebody open raises and they fold to a very high percentage of 3-bets, then we can 3-bet them as a bluff to exploit this tendency. So if we play online and if we use a HUD, there is a fold versus a 3-bet stat that we can use, and this is just the acronym that I use. You can use whatever you want. If our opponent has a fold versus 3-bet stat that is equal to or higher than what we saw on the previous slide based upon our sizing, well, if it's equal to, we know that our 3-bet bluff is going to be 0 EV, meaning it's going to be break even. But if our opponent folds any higher than that, then it's going to be outright profitable. So for example, if we go back to the previous slide, so let's say that we're just going to stick with a 3x sizing, which is perfectly fine. We'll just use this as an example. So we'll just round up and say that our break-even point is 67%. If we have an opponent, if we go back to here, if we have an opponent that is folding to 70% of 3-bets, well, if we 3-bet this opponent as a bluff, it should be, over the long run, if this is statistics that hold true in regards to how they play, it should be slightly outright profitable. So this is an exploitative poker move. Now, in terms of this, we also have to take rake into consideration. We also have to take sample size into consideration. So there are a lot of different things to take into consideration as well. We need to take into consideration our opponent's range, players left to act as well, and so forth. But these are the two different primary reasons. In terms of 3-betting as a bluff, there are specific type of hands I'd recommend. This isn't really mathematical per se, except some of it is, because we're going to talk about combinatorics and blockers later in the course. But hands that block the likelihood that our opponents have a premium hand are good candidates for a 3-bet bluffing hand, especially hands that have an ace and a king in it. Because if we think about our opponent's range, and I'll pull up Equilab in a second, in terms of 3-betting and 4-betting hands, it's going to include a lot of aces and a lot of kings. In addition to that, we have what I like to call our implied odds hands, which we have down here. So suited hands, suited connectors, and small pocket pairs, because, well, suited connectors can make flushes and straights in 2 pairs, small pocket pairs can make sets, and suited hands, of course, can make flushes, especially if we have an ace high suited hand or a king high suited hand that can make the nut flush or a very high flush. Now, let me go ahead and bring up Equilab, because I just want to help you visualize the importance of some of these hands. So in terms of blocker hands, when we're 3-betting as a bluff, ones that I like are ace deuce through ace 5 suited. Why? Well, because they can make the ace high flush and they can make the wheel straight, in addition to sometimes, let's say that our opponent has pocket kings or our opponent has pocket queens. If we flop an ace, we're going to win sometimes as well. So I like these ace high ones. In terms of the king high ones that we're going to be bluffing, it might be like a king 10 suited or king 9 suited or king 8 suited. The queen blockers and jack blockers really aren't as strong, because if we think about our opponent's strongest hands, they're going to include a lot more aces and a lot more kings and queens. But some of the queens could potentially be blockers as well, such as these ones right here. And then for the suited hands, these are examples of suited hands. For suited hands, I typically like suited connectors and suited 1-gappers. So I'm just going to highlight some of the suited connectors and suited 1-gappers, because these hands can make two pair, they can make straight draws, they can make flush draws, straights and flushes, which are very powerful. And just being able to have the draws allow us to semi-bluff effectively post-flop as well. And then of course our small pocket pairs can make sets. So hands like these are going to be good 3-bet bluffing hands. You'll notice I didn't include any offsuited hands because we want to include the likelihood of making flushes. So yeah, so those are some of the just general types of hands that I would consider as a 3-bet bluff. But I would just caution you, I would just say have good reason when you're looking to 3-bet bluff your opponent, and always take the math into consideration, the break-even point. Understanding that realistically to make a profit, our opponents need to be folding 3 out of 4 times realistically looking at these, because in terms of our situation, sometimes we'll be betting a little less than 3x, sometimes we'll be betting more. If we just want to average it out, I would say roughly 75% of the time, or 3 out of 4 times, they need to fold to a 3-bet for it to be outright profitable as a bluff. Now, when we think about this, this doesn't include post-flop play. And that's where things get a bit tricky, and that all comes down to your skill advantage and how well you play in 3-bet pots and the ranges that your opponents play. And it's very hard to quantify that number here, but that's where we do EV calculations after a specific scenario played out to determine how well and how profitable or unprofitable that situation was. And we'll talk about those EV calculations later in the course. Now, in terms of 3-bet bluffs, I'm not going to do any example hands because I think that just talking about them and understanding these two reasons are important, and just knowing really for the low stakes and the micro stakes online, which I'm assuming a lot of people taking this course are playing, because you should already know this. Understand that one of the primary reasons would be to exploit a high fold equity after somebody open raises, somebody that folds to a lot of 3-bets. That's the candidate that we want to attack with a 3-bet bluff. In addition to that, we can combine this, and we can actually put a plus sign here and say plus a wide opening range. So for example, somebody opening from the cutoff, the button, or the small blind. So that's going to conclude our discussion on talking about 3-bet bluffs and 3-bet bluff mathematics. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video. Take care.